Rebekah Sugar herself has gone on record to say that Rose Quartz was a terrible person. I felt like I needed to get that out of the way right away to make it clear that regardless of how you feel about what I have to say in this video, the title of this video, at least the title on the cover of the video, is justified. Rose Quartz really was a terrible person. Her creator has admitted that. I say that because I fully expect this to be a very divisive video. And I want to be clear that I'm perfectly okay with that. I know that I can get really defensive about my content. It's something that has a tendency to happen even when I go into a situation trying to make sure it doesn't. And I realize that I'm going to have to redouble my efforts not to let that happen this time around, because I understand going into this video that this is going to be a very divisive video. But I feel like this is something that has to be said. Rose Quartz really was a terrible person, more so than any of us ever realized. Now, I want to be clear. I am only speaking as someone who has experience with the series up to this point. We may learn more details about Rose's life which further recontextualize who she was within the scope of the narrative and lessen the blow of some of the things that I'm going to be talking about here, but that does not make these things less true in principle. Maybe we will learn somewhere that she had a better reason for her behavior than it seems at this point, but that does not make what I have to say here any less true in principle. I've been seeing a lot of people online recently talking about how the Rose Diamond reveal recontextualizes a lot of stuff from the series, and no, this is not a response to any specific instance of that. No, not even that one, the one that you're thinking of right now. This is more a response to the, I think, surprisingly common belief that the recontextualization itself inherently makes the reveal good. That the recontextualization of Rose's character in and of itself inherently makes the Rose Diamond reveal good for the show, because I don't think that it does. Again, with further recontextualization down the line, it could, but at this point in time, I don't think it does. And this is going to be my final video discussing why I feel that way, going over some of the major issues that this recontextualization brings to the narrative. I already pointed out that making the gem that Pearl supposedly chose to follow her literal slave owner rather than a gem that she came to admire naturally already takes something away from the strong character that Pearl was already at the time of the Gem Civil War. And I stand by that. I got comments on that video saying that Pearl still could have chosen to follow Rose, that we don't have any evidence that Rose ordered Pearl to follow her or used her authority as a diamond to force Pearl into that. And I'm sorry, but that is wrong. I want to get this one out of the way first. You are wrong. The fact that Rose literally owned Pearl and had the ability to impose her will on Pearl in such a way that Pearl had no choice in the matter means that our default assumption must be that Rose used that authority and used that ability to force Pearl into these situations. The burden of proof is on the narrative of the show to convince us otherwise. So right away, until it is proven otherwise, that is one major issue that I take away from this reveal. Pearl is no longer the terrifying renegade. She's no longer the Pearl who made her own choices and instead is just another Pearl following the orders of her master. And while, like I said in that previous video, Pearl has definitely come into her own and made up for that, at least to an extent, in the course of the show as we have seen it, and that is great. It really shows the strength of her character, the potential of her character. It still takes something away from her past characterization. That's a fact. And it is great that Pearl found a way to work around the literal brainwashing that Rose imposed upon her and tell Rose's secret. But that does not mean that Pearl doesn't still have a long way to go. And while it is possible that Rose was a benevolent master, one who afforded Pearl choices whenever she could, Pearl, throughout the entire series, has been trying to escape from Rose's influence over her. Pearl, since the beginning, has been written as a character with a traumatic past who has been trying to work through that trauma. And ever since we learned that she was literally someone's slave at one point, it's been clear that that is the trauma that she's trying to work through. And now we know in no uncertain terms that that trauma was inflicted upon her by Rose because Rose was the one who kept her as a slave. Regardless of how benevolent Rose was towards her, that is still what happened. And we know that at least once, and almost definitely more than once, it was not a different gem, but was in fact Rose who modified Pearl's mind to suit Rose's needs. And that in and of itself is still not necessarily bad for the narrative of this show. But I have reason to believe firmly that it is, but I'll talk about that in a little while. I also, now more so than ever, strongly doubt that Rose ever cared about the freedom and well-being of other gems. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, something that I'd actually planned to talk about before this reveal showed up and came to demand my entire attention for so long. That Rose does not actually seem to care about the freedom and well-being of gems, at least not beyond a certain extent. Notice, first of all, that the Crystal Gem Creed does not make any mention of gem independence and freedom. Here it is, right here on the screen, right now. You can read it. It makes no mention of building a place where gems can be themselves, regardless of what that means. And I know some of you guys are going to cite the answer when Rose seemed to be so accepting of Garnet, but go back and listen to that scene again. I've mentioned this before, but Rose's acceptance of Garnet here really comes across less as Rose accepting Garnet for who she is and more Rose finding Garnet interesting. She seems to like the idea of Garnet remaining Garnet, of Garnet remaining who she is, because she in this case being Rose, finds it personally interesting, i.e. her interest in Garnet being a fusion is selfish. It really comes across as selfish. It really comes across as if Rose finds gems who deviate from the norm more interesting and so wants to surround herself with them so that her life will be more interesting, and that's selfish, and it's wrong. Just like it was wrong of her to brainwash Pearl into not being able to talk about Rose's true identity. First of all, brainwashing someone is just wrong in general, regardless of how you do it or why. And second, it proves once and for all that she didn't care about Pearl's well-being, as this caused Pearl real distress, and it proves that she didn't actually trust Pearl or care about Pearl's freedom, because if she did, she would have trusted Pearl to make the right decision for herself. She would have trusted Pearl not to betray her. She would have trusted Pearl to be a good friend and make the right choice. Her desire to prevent Bismuth from using the breaking point is now colored, as it suddenly seems that she no longer cared for the well-being of gems in the opposing army, and instead cared about her own well-being, that she feared that Bismuth would discover that she herself was a diamond and want to shatter her. It even colors her very motivations for starting the war. Yes, we know for a fact that she wanted to preserve the life on Earth because she found it interesting, which is also selfish, as it implies that she didn't actually care about the well-being of that life for its own sake, but for her sake. But we now know from her dialogue with Blue and Yellow in this scene here that she started the war and created the Rose Quartz persona for herself in the first place so that she could use it as an excuse to try to convince Blue and Yellow to let her stop colonization. It was never about fighting for gem freedom, and if there are gems in her ranks who thought that it was, gems like Bismuth, it must be because she lied to them and said that it was to earn their loyalty, which is coercive and wrong. Looking at the timeline of the war, it really does seem as if she only escalated the war beyond a rebellion of just her and Pearl in the hopes of convincing Blue and Yellow Diamond to let her end colonization. That she created that scenario where millions of gems ended up dying only because she wanted to convince the other diamonds to let her have her way. And the way it's framed, it really doesn't seem as if she ever just told them that she didn't want to continue colonizing her planet. I know it's up for debate just how respected she was among the other diamonds, but I still assert that in order for the government of Homeworld to remain stable, all of the diamonds must have had equal power in the eyes of other gems, and that therefore if Pink Diamond had just stood up for herself and made public her desire not to colonize the Earth, the other diamonds would have had to have let her. That all she ever did was try to make excuses in the hopes that Blue and Yellow would tell her that it was okay, that she didn't have to keep colonizing the planet. It really does seem now that Rose was just too much of a coward to stand up for herself the way that she should have, and that millions of people died because of it. And while that is in character, it means that we will never know what would have happened if she had just tried to utilize her authority as a diamond to dictate what she wanted. And regardless of how in character it is, it still means that the consequences of her actions are her fault and her responsibility. Just as if you hit someone's car accidentally with yours, you still have to face the consequences. We have to hold Rose accountable for the consequences of her mistakes. And a big part of my worry regarding this reveal is that the crew is not going to do that they are not going to shape the narrative in such a way that it holds her responsible. We also know that it was Pink Diamond who bubbled the other Rose Quartz gems, or I should say, the Rose Quartz gems that are floating around back on the Zoo space station. It's implied that this was done because, quote-unquote, rose quartz rebelled, and the diamonds were worried that other rose quartz might rebel as well. But we know now that a rose quartz never actually rebelled, and because it was Pink Diamond who bubbled those rose quartz, I think that it would be irresponsible of us not to consider the possibility that Rose bubbled those rose quartz to cover her own tracks, to make it less likely that the other diamonds would recognize the difference between her persona and an actual rose quartz. That she imprisoned hundreds of gems, hundreds of innocent gems, just to cover her own tracks. And then she left them behind on the zoo when she killed off her Pink Diamond identity at the mercy of the other diamonds. Which brings me to the matter of the zoo in general. I don't do this often, so I hope you'll understand the weight of what I'm about to say. Trigger warning for talk of sexual assault. We now know that it was Rose who built the zoo and transplanted those humans to it. Like, not literally the same humans that we saw in the zoo episodes, but their ancestors. We now know that it was Rose who transplanted those people there, imprisoned them, and then forced them to breed so that their population would not die out and she would continue to be amused by them. We know for a fact that it was Rose who put this policy in place, since we know that since Pink Diamond's death, Blue Diamond has been fighting to keep the zoo exactly as Pink Diamond left it, and that's the way things are done now. And I'm not going to beat around the bush with this. I'm not going to put on the kid gloves. I'm not going to pull my punches. Forcing people to mate with each other, that is sexual assault. It is disgusting. And it is wrong. Not to mention that when she killed her Pink Diamond persona, she did so with the full and complete knowledge that she was cutting herself off from the zoo and wouldn't be able to recover those people and bring them home. Probably expecting the zoo to be destroyed and all of its occupants killed, as the other diamonds would have seen it as a waste of resources. And while we're on the subject of sexual assault, I certainly hope that the suspicion of the fandom is true and Rose and Pearl never actually had a romantic relationship, because we know that until Greg rolled around, a romantic relationship to Rose was a physical relationship. And I cannot stress this enough, a slave master forming a physical relationship with their slave, present or past, constitutes such a discrepancy in power that I cannot think of a single variation on this situation that I would not classify as rape. And again, we could learn stuff in upcoming episodes that further recontextualizes things and changes my opinion of all of this. We may learn down the line that Rose really was trying to do what was best and that she had fewer choices than it appears at this point that she had. But until we get more episodes and see that that's going to be the case, I have no choice but to form opinions about this reveal based upon what we've already been given. And based on what I've been given, based on what the show has given me up to this point, I'm sorry, but whether it has the potential to be good or not, this reveal, in my eyes, is completely unnecessary in regards to Rose's characterization, that it does not add anything substantial enough to Rose's characterization to justify its existence, and has overall more of a negative impact on the series than a positive one. I still don't hate it. I see the potential that it brings to the story, and I look forward to seeing that potential explored. But that's not to say that I like it, either, because, again, I think it's completely unnecessary. If the purpose of this reveal was to hammer home that Rose was not a good person, then it failed because we already knew that. Rose has been a gray character for a long time. So rather than hammering that home for us, this reveal just ends up erasing the few heroic things, the few good-natured things that we could still infer that Rose had done. It turns her from a gray hero who largely failed at what she was trying to do, to possibly one of the worst villains in this series, harms the character of Pearl, and saddles Steven with all this additional baggage that I just don't feel like his character deserves to be saddled with. I understand that Steven's a character and that I didn't create him and therefore I don't have any right to dictate what's done to him. But saddling him with all of this baggage, with all of the knowledge of what his mother did and who she was, is starting to come off as cruel. Unnecessarily so, and it's coloring my view of this series. And so, because I am so worried about the effects that this reveal is going to have on the series, I've come out of it more or less feeling neutral about it. I'm waiting to see what happens, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to criticize it based on what we know about it right now. Criticism of art is important, and I wouldn't criticize this show so strongly if I didn't care about it, if I didn't think that it was a positive force in the world. And because I don't really have an idea for a wind down for this video, I'm just going to jump right to the outro. As per usual, guys, I'd like to know, what do you think of all the stuff that I said in this video? Though, to be perfectly honest, because as we discussed before, I do tend to get defensive about my content. Please don't be surprised if I stay away from the comment section of this video, at least at first. And please keep in mind that if I do so, it does not mean that I don't want you guys to strike up a conversation about this in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. All that I ask is that all of us try to be as civil as possible when discussing these matters. I am not quite so naive as to not realize that I did bring up some sensitive subject matter in this video. Either way though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.